I think at the core, I love adventure and I love being outside. That's one of the things that I really enjoy about running is that it takes me places, and it gives me an opportunity to explore. I love that I can go for a run and get a feel for the life in a specific area, and that is what I love about being in the outdoors as well. There's just something very grounding, that's very invigorating, and spiritual, I guess you could say. And at the same time, it reminds me of just how small, I am as a human in this vast world. And so, and I think I also naturally have a curious spirit. And so that combination is what really made my heart leap when Myrna first, um, spoke the invitation into reality for me. That yeah, I want to go out there. I want to have my, Julie Andrews, the hills are alive moment. Running across the Rocky Mountains. I love that, and I mean, I feel like I'm. You can hear me smiling already as I'm talking about this. Just envisioning. Just I love being outside. You know.
Women's running. Women's running stories.
Hi, my name is Carolyn Sue. I am Chinese American and I'm a mother of two. And I am the creator and founder of the Instagram platform Diverse We Run, where every week I feature an athlete, a runner who is a person of color, and I share about how our racial background, our cultural background, our ethnicity shape and influence not only our entry into the sport, but also our experience, our lived experience in the sport as well.
Yes, in this episode, we are featuring Carolyn Sue. She is the founder of Diverse We Run, and of course, she is also a runner. And her running took a new direction on one fateful day when she indeed received an invitation from her friend Mirna to participate in the multi-day trail running stage race, the Trans Rockies. Up to that point, Carolyn's running had been focused on the road, and in fact, she had never run on the trails. That invitation, however, sparked something in her curious, adventurous spirit, and that is what we're going to hear all about in this episode. But before we hear more from Carolyn, I want to welcome you to Women's Running Stories. We are the podcast where women share stories about their running experiences. I am Cherie Louise Turner. I am the host and producer of Women's Running Stories. And if you're new here, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And if you are returning, I appreciate you coming back. And for this episode, we're just going to jump right in. We're going to hear how Carolyn Sue went from being a non-trail runner to a trail runner. And central to the story is this event, the Trans Rockies. Here is Carolyn Sue.
So I did not have, I feel like my knowledge of the event was pretty limited, aside from the fact that I knew it was through the Rocky Mountains. And I had one friend who was invited to participate in it through a sponsorship with Under Armour back in 2019. And I did an Instagram takeover for her on Diverse We Run as she shared photos and videos of her experience going through it. And seeing that was incredible, and seeing her just traverse these beautiful, mountain ranges and the terrain, and getting to experience something like that seemed so remarkably adventurous. I mean, it was like my first exposure, I think, to this type of event. And so she did the 3-day version of the race, and I remember thinking to myself as I was, helping her share her story and her videos and whatnot, I remember thinking, "Wow, that is so cool, and I wish I could do something like that." But I'll never be able to do that. And I don't know why. That was just my default response. Like, I immediately just discounted myself from ever being able to participate in an event like that. Like, not even like, the idea of participating wasn't even an option for me, and I didn't even it wasn't a conscientious thought. It just was, like, the automatic natural response. Like, admiration of my friend, but then an immediate, like, "Yeah, but I'll never be able to do that."
Of course, as it turned out, not everybody shared the same outlook.
In December of 2020, a good friend of mine, Mirna Valerio, which I think most people know of her as the Mirna Vader on Instagram, social media, and just out in the running fitness trail world. So the Mirna Vader, Mirna, she she extended an invitation for me to participate. She has been working closely with the race directors of Trans Rockies for several years, ever since her first experience participating in the event back close to, I want to say, 2017, 2018. And so she called me up in December, and I honestly, still to this day, I should probably ask her, but I don't know what made her think of me. But for whatever reason, Myrna thought of me, and so she gave me a call and asked if I would be interested in participating in the 2021 Trans Rockies event. And immediately, of course, I thought back to my other friend who I did the Instagram takeover for, Allison. And my immediate response was, "Yeah, like, I definitely wanna do this." In my heart, I was on board. And then my brain was like, "Wait a minute, Carolyn. What are you doing?" Then I had to step back and kinda think about, "Okay, I have no I have no idea how to even prepare for something like this. I've never done a trail race before, let alone a multi-stage, point to point trail event that's high altitude in the Rocky Mountains. How am I gonna how am I gonna even get ready to do something like this?" And at the same time, I had been recovering from surgery. I had surgery at the beginning of 2020 on my right foot. I had an accessory navicular bone. And so all of 2020 was spent, not only recovering from surgery, but rehabbing, doing physical therapy as best as I could on my own, of course, again, because everything had shut down. And I was like, I don't, am I'm not even running right, right now. And you're inviting me to race through the Rockies? I don't know. And so I wanted to talk with my coach first, of course, to see if that would be a viable option. But ultimately, what really pushed me to agree to take this invitation to participate was representation. Representation of Asian Americans, representation of being a female Asian American out in the trail world, because it's just, as much as I think the running world in general likes to believe that we are very inclusive or accessible for everyone and anyone, it just simply is not. Based on the history of our nation, and also based on the history of how our sport even came to be, and also based on the history of what has happened to people of color out in trail, wooded, forested areas. It's just simply not historically a safe space if you are a person of color. And especially then in 2020, with the rise of anti-Asian sentiments and hate crimes that had been recorded, as well as all the hate crimes that were not recorded. There was a huge spike of anti-Asian hate crimes, and so there were a lot of I felt like there were a lot of risks involved, but at the same time, I felt like it was that much more necessary for me as an Asian American, Chinese American female mother to take up space and to be there to take this opportunity, and to show others in the Asian American community, that the outdoors and that this trail world is also for us, and that we can participate in things like that, so that there's not anyone who was like me in 2019 seeing my friend participate in this incredible event and then immediately discounting myself from it. So that is how I first set forth in training and preparing for this event. Prior to participating in the Trans Rockies run, I had never participated in any kind of trail race. I only started training on trails because of the event itself, like in order to get ready. But prior to that, I think my only experience on any kind of outdoors, type of thing, was just going on short basic hikes with my family, since we moved here to the New England area back in 2013. I definitely, I admit that I want to say maybe the first several months of practicing trail running, I constantly felt very nervous being out in these wooded areas by myself. Already as a female, even when I went out for early morning runs here in the neighborhood area, when it's kind of like just barely light outside, I've always been someone who's very, very conscientious of my environment and surroundings, which is really why I don't like running with any kind of music or podcast, just because I want to be aware, and that I also don't want to seem vulnerable. And in 2020, like I said, with the rise of more, or I should say, the resurgence of anti-Asian sentiments, I was very on guard, and concerned for my safety anytime I stepped outside for any reason. And it used to be that prior to 2020, I would want to run in areas where I knew there would be more people, because I felt like if anything were to happen, that I could shout for help and there would be people around. But then during 2020, I wanted to avoid places where I would run into people, because I was just so nervous about what people would say, like the racial slurs and the animosity, that me, my family, and other friends already, even in the Boston area, that we had already been experiencing because of the anti-Asian rhetoric that was being spread at that time. And so it didn't help then, that I would have to go train by myself in these wooded areas, where there would be no one around, or maybe an occasional person here and there that I would see. And it was always this like I don't know, internal debate, of, okay, I think I see someone up ahead on the trail. If it was like I had to play out different scenarios. If they say something to me, or if they try to do anything to me, how am I going to react? Where am I going to run? Where is my phone? Where is my, like the different, what safety devices do I have? How am I going to respond? And then if they don't say anything to me, great. We'll just keep going on our way. But there was just this constant heightened sense of, okay, be aware, pay attention. What is that sound? You know, like what was that movement? And that definitely, ugh, that takes a toll. And it took many, many months for me to practice being on the trails and feel a little bit more relaxed and comfortable.
Little by little, Carolyn was adjusting to the trail environment. She was totally committed in her training and to running the Trans Rockies. Now, at the Trans Rockies, runners have a choice between a 3-day event and a 6-day event. The 3-day event covers 60 miles, and the 6-day event covers double that. Carolyn was entered in the latter, the full 6 days.
So I had no idea what to expect. And it was really, I was really nervous, you know, walking onto the campgrounds the day before the race. And it was honestly very reassuring to see some faces of people of color. And before Colorado, before I had arrived, I did get connected with a group from Harlem Runs. And so Harlem Run predominantly, you know, people of color, the running group itself, you know, in New York. And so then their athletes were all people of color as well. I think they had like 4 or 5 people there. And so I had already connected with several of them. And so it was definitely a reassurance to see their faces when I first walked into the campsite. I mean, there were hundreds of tents already set up because this whole race, it's point to point. So every day you're camping there overnight, and then all the runners set off, and then the staff break down all the tents and then move everything over to the finish point for that day and set up another campsite where everybody stays overnight, and then we do that. So that also was like a very new thing for me, and I was nervous. I'm like, my family, we did not grow up camping. Camping is very uncomfortable for me. I don't like, as much as I love being in the outdoors, I also I also enjoy being able to get a good night's sleep. But anyway, so you know, walking onto the campsite that day was like, wow, okay, so I'm here. This is real. We see the mountains, you know, in the background behind the whole village of tents set up, and then I see familiar faces from Harlem Runs. And that definitely helped put me at ease a little bit more. And everybody was like, you know, nervously excited about being there. And, you know, I got my bib and, you know, found my tent and was able to just like slowly get everything situated and set up. And it was just, for me, I just wanted to mentally give myself the space to get my bearings. So every evening there was a little like history lesson about the land that we would be going through the following day, as well as kind of like a rundown of what to expect as far as weather, terrain, and any kind of special gear that we may have to prepare for. So that was like our evening meeting that we would have. And so before day one, you know, we had like the whole welcome ceremony and then a brief history of the land. And during that, it was very interesting because before flying out to Colorado, I was very intentional at looking into the native indigenous tribes and like whose land that actually belonged to, because I wanted to honor and acknowledge the fact that like we were able to participate in this type of event because of the indigenous peoples who stewarded and cared for the land before us, and so I looked into that and learned that, the portions of the Rocky Mountains that we'd be going through, belong to the Ute people as well as the Arapaho people. And I looked up, I found different books that then like were written by the native people who inhabited the area. And I wanted to spend intentional time to, I think, see the land and life through their eyes. And in a small way, I felt like that was like a way to kind of to honor them. And so that was kind of my mindset going into things. And so when the history lesson started, I guess I was just kind of expecting something along those lines, or at least acknowledging, whose land we were on. But instead, the person running the meeting, he talked about how great it was that the government of, or the state of Colorado, quote unquote, gave back, large portions of land to the public to make it free public space for anyone to be able to access and use. And then, everyone was applauding the state of Colorado for doing so. And it was surprising for me because I wanted to say like, well, but it wasn't really the land didn't really belong to the state of Colorado to begin with. It was taken from from the indigenous nations who existed here before they were forcibly removed. But, I didn't say that out loud, and it just was something that immediately made me uncomfortable. But I was just like, okay, that's okay. Let's just roll with it. And so that was kind of like one thing that I felt like emotionally, internally, I don't know. It was one of those things where I was like, does anybody else know this? Is anybody else aware of this? But then at the same time, talking to myself, like, okay, well, Carolyn, is that something you can give your capacity to thinking about right now? If not, you need to focus on getting ready for the race. But at the same time, it did make me wonder and think, are there any runners here at this like 300-person event who are Native American? And like, if so, what are they thinking and how are they feeling to have their history erased? So but then like I needed to compartmentalize and set that aside because I needed to get ready to participate in this event. And so that was kind of, not to sound like up and down, but that's really a lot of my mental emotional experience at this race. It was very much like up and down, because it would be up with all the excitement, and anticipation of being able to like be out in nature, but then it would go down when experiencing something like this, or you know later, actually, during the first day at the very first aid station that my friends and I approached, there was a white guy wearing a huge afro. and like one of the Latina runners next to me asked him, "Do you think it's okay for you to wear that?" And this guy was immediately like, "Yeah, because my daughter has really curly hair like this too. And so I'm fine with it." But then like the black woman who was running with us, she just didn't say anything, and we kept going. So, there are things like that where it's like up and down, where it, like, one moment you're immersed in this incredible race experience, but then the next moment you're hit with the reality that either your people's history is disregarded, or your culture is appropriated, and made a costume of.
My name is Cindy Burnett, and each week I interview at least 2 traditionally published authors on my podcast, Thoughts from a Page. We talk spoiler-free about their books, so you can listen whether you have read the book or not. And then we delve into things that you most likely won't hear about anywhere else. The importance of the cover design, why they included various aspects of the story, personal details about both the books and the authors' lives, and so much more. You can find the podcast on every major platform and learn more about it on my website, thoughtsfromapage.com. Thanks so much for checking it out.
To be sure, Carolyn Sue's first trail event experience was proving to be up and down. But going back before the racist encounter at that first aid station, the start of stage 1, that was an up moment.
When we all gathered the morning of day 1, I was feeling amped up, honestly. I was excited. I was like ready. I wanted to do this. And definitely, like the first, oh, how hours, I don't remember, but like first several hours, I would say I was like, yeah, like running along, chatting it up. And also, I think the women whom I was with were wonderful company, and they were from both Under Armour as well as Harlem Run, and we just chatted about everything under the sun, our experiences as being women of color in the sport, and what that was like. Anywhere from, yeah, like seeing that one guy at the aid station, in the afro, from that to things like why it's so difficult to find clothing, running clothes that fit properly, because majority of brands, the models, and the measurements that they use are really just catered to like Eastern European, standards. But if you're more curvy, or if you're more, just like different, or your hair is different, like, or your nose bridge is different. Like, it's just hard. It's challenging to find even basic things like sunglasses or hats, that fit properly, let alone like the right shorts that can fit right without chafing, without falling, without all this stuff. But yeah, it was a really great time, and definitely after after like 26 miles, I was feeling a little bit tired, and feeling the elevation. Feeling the altitude a little bit, because Boston, where I'm from, is sea level, and Colorado is not. And but it was a great, I want to say it was a great first day, and I was very, very relieved to see the finish line, finishing, shoot area, and felt incredible relief. I like lay down in the grass afterwards and just breathed in the fact that I just did something amazing. So day 2 was a tough one, and it's known to be, some people call it the hardest day out of all of them. Day 2 is, mileage wise, was very short, only 15 miles. But the first 3, you're going straight up in elevation. So day 2, you're climbing Hope's Pass, and I wish I could remember the elevation gain right now off the top of my head, but it is just, you're basically going vertical for 2.5 miles. And also that night/early morning, a storm was passing through. So as a result, the ground was very, very muddy, and the path up Hope's Pass was single track. So that just means it's enough for one person at a time to be going up. It's not wide enough for even 2 people to be side by side. And so I can't even like, I 2.5-ish miles doesn't sound like a lot when you're just road running, but going up that mountain, I don't even know. I felt like it was we spent an eternity that day just trying to slog up the mountain, where to my left was the mountain wall. and then to my right immediately was just this like drop. And everything was muddy, so we're all, every step that you take, you're kind of like sliding down a bit because of the mud. And we all have our trekking poles that we're using, to try to make sure, it's just helping us keep us stable as we're going up there. Everyone's got their like rain gear on, and it's very quiet. It was very quiet. And in the meantime, the air is just getting thinner and thinner. I was definitely struggling. I was having a hard time breathing. I felt like every breath I had to like that, to get up, and it was really difficult. I got into a really dark, dark, dark space, dark headspace of feeling very defeated, and as I had to keep leaning aside to let people pass me. And I think it took me 5 hours just to get up Hope's Pass. And the name of that is really ironic to me because it's like, there is no hope. I'm going to die out here. But a highlight I want to say through that though was I befriended two women who also were kind of on the tail end, I should say. I think we were one of the last few people who crossed the finish that day after 8 hours. But there were two women out there, Courtney and Peg, whom I ended up climbing the mountain with them. And I loved it. I mean, I loved becoming friends with them. And it was one of those, like, I guess you bond in the midst of struggle, and we struggled together. Yeah, yeah. Like everyone's like, I mean, we were like telling our like deepest, deepest, darkest like secrets, like bearing our souls to each other. Cause I don't know, like something happens when you're just like in such a state of like vulnerability climbing up that dang mountain and then eventually being able to make our way down, and we were able to cross that finish line. We like linked arms crossing, and it just felt like this huge, huge accomplishment that day. And yeah, and I just really appreciated their presence and their friendship. And then there was a part of me that was like, "Oh, shoot. This was just day 2. I have 4 more days. Like, what am I gonna be able to do this?" And I texted my coach, that night of like, I cannot imagine how I'm going to survive and make it through 4 more days, and she reminded me like one day at a time. Like, do not like we don't want to think about the whole staircase. We just think about the step in front of us. So, it was like really a practice in living in the moment, being present, and just really focusing on, okay, eat, get a good night's sleep, and then that's it. And tomorrow will come when tomorrow comes. Well, so for day 3, yeah. So day 3, I woke up feeling good, and that was a big relief as well. I woke up feeling refreshed, and my legs surprisingly didn't feel like lead, and so I was like, okay, okay. We can do this. I can do this, and day 3, thankfully, was not a climb like Hope's Pass. And so many people were like, if you were able to survive Hope's Pass, you got it. You can do the rest of the race. And day 3 was the terrain was a lot more similar to day 1, and so that was also reassuring for me. And I started. I had an early start. Ever since Mirna started working more with the race directors, she was able to establish what's called Dawn Patrol, which is basically for people who feel like they're going to need more time on the course than the allotted like 8 hours or so. Then you can get like a 1 hour I think it's a 1 hour, if not two, but I think it's 1 hour head start. And so I started with Dawn Patrol and I felt good. And we started at Leadville. So, Leadville, which again is known for being like the highest point in the country. So, the air was pretty thin. And several miles in, we are, I mean, just because it wasn't a Hope's Pass type of mountain didn't mean there was no mountain. I mean, we're still going through the Rockies. So, as the first climb started and my breathing started to get more labored again, it made me panic a little bit cuz I was like, "Uh-oh." Like I don't want a replay of yesterday. But I was really just trying to once again, it's like, "Okay, one step at a time. Just one step at a time, Carolyn. Okay, like take your time, breathe, and we're just going to do one step at a time." And that helped, and I got to the first aid station, but was definitely feeling really raw and emotional already. And out when I got to the first aid station, one of the photographers, could see that I was struggling, and he was like, "Hey, do you want to do you want to go say hi? There's a golden retriever who is there. Like there was a couple who like they brought their golden retriever out every year to go and like cheer for the runners. I think they're locals, and so they would go and kind of be like a part of the support at the aid station, um, and this golden retriever, she she was older, and I found out like she had cancer, and it was going to be her final year to be out like spectating. and and I bent down and was like petting her, and I was saying, "Who's the good girl?" And then as she lifted her head, into my palm to like receive my pets, I don't know what it was. I just burst into tears and I started crying and was like, "You're a good girl." Like you're such a good girl. And I'm like squatting there, like weeping, petting this dog. And like, I don't know, it was just this very surreal moment of just once again, like I thought I was already laid bare the day before at Hope's Pass, but no, there was more vulnerability to be had. and and then I got up and hugged a few people and then went off on my way for the second portion. And day three, I think the total of that was also 20 something, like 26 miles as well. And as I was heading towards the final aid station that day and going through the mountains, I could tell my feet, my ankles, things were kind of giving way. I almost tripped and like fell a few times, and then I was starting to feel like the early signs of plantar fasciitis, which I had experienced, years before in the past, um, and so I mean, I was definitely like run walking and just giving myself kind of the space to think through, what I was doing. And and I recognize like, I think I'm reaching my body's limits beyond which I'm sure I could push, and push through the next 3 days. But for day three, definitely I was on track for finishing once again, like at 8 hours. And I I knew that if I was going to continue and try to do the full 6 days, I was likely going to take 8+ hours every day. Um, and and I had to reflect over what was my purpose, what were my goals, in coming out to participate in the first place. Was it to say that, yeah, I did this 6 day thing, this event, and or was it for different reasons? And I was able to identify how, one of my main reason for coming out here is for representation, and it's to show people like me in my community that we can do hard things like this, that the outdoors is for us, and at the same time to change the the norm, the accepted norm at the time of who belongs and who shows up at the start lines, of these races. And I asked myself, like, did I accomplish these things? And the answer was yes. I did, and I have. And so it helped me to realize, like, I didn't need to force my body to complete 6 days simply for the sake of completing it, and then potentially re-injuring myself, and really just wrecking my body. And so it was, out on the course that day that I came to terms with that, and I genuinely felt peace with it. And I definitely kept going that day, and I walked the last 4 miles to complete the day's event. And then I spoke to my coach, and I told, my other friends, my new friends, there from Harlem Run and Under Armour, that, like, I was just going to leave with everyone who was doing the 3 day, and I wasn't going to finish the 6 days. And I appreciated, everyone who was like, you know still wanting me to complete 6 days. And I understand, like, everyone's point of view of where they were coming from, in just trying to, like, make sure that I wasn't going to make a decision that I was going to regret. And I appreciated that. But definitely after I got back, after I left, I had a phone call with my coach, and I told her, like, I'm proud of myself for recognizing my body's limits, first of all, because historically for me, that was not, like, that was not something that I did. As a daughter of immigrants and growing up in an Asian family, it was all about, like, you just continue to grind, you push, and you push through the pain, you push through the difficulty, because that's how my parents had to survive, right, in establishing a new life here. And it was always about, like, excellence, pursuing excellence, finishing what you started, following through with your commitments, and, like, there's nothing, like, you don't take no for an answer. But that mentality is what got me injured multiple times over the course of my running life, and that mentality is what has caused me to have panic attacks and mental breakdowns because of it. And so it really was a huge, huge point of progress for me to have been able to recognize, like, I think I have reached my body's limits. I recognize what signs and signals my body is telling me, and I have confidence and peace in saying I don't need to keep pushing myself to this arbitrary endpoint. And so, yeah, like, I finished, even though I started out with the intention of participating in all 6 days at Trans Rockies, I called it at 3 days, and I'm super proud of myself for doing that. I think back to the Carolyn in 2019, who admired from afar the friends who ran on trails outside, and I think about how I would look at the different running magazines and see the photos, with the majestic mountains and trees, and how I felt like I was on the outside. But then now, being able to feel the kind of familiarity and comfort that I have, like the eagerness and enthusiasm I feel when I go out, and in wanting to like invite my family, invite friends to participate in trail runs with me. It's so different and I love it.
You know, I love that too. And that is going to bring us to the end of Carolyn Sue's story on women's running stories. I want to thank Carolyn so much for coming on the podcast and sharing this part of her running journey. And I also want to thank her for all of the work that she does through Diverse We Run. Carolyn is also the co-host of a relatively new podcast called Making Strides. And on the podcast, she and her co-host, Stephanie Flippen, who is also Asian American, the two of them, they have conversations about the experiences of underrepresented and marginalized communities in the running world. Please go give it a listen. In particular, I liked a really recent episode called Barriers to Entry, and they talk all about trail running. So I will link to that in the show notes. And yeah, go give it a listen, subscribe to their podcast. They're doing good work over there. In the show notes, I will also provide ways that you can keep up with women's running stories. I thank you so much for listening, and I would really love it if you would rate and review the show wherever you listen. I also want to mention that this podcast is part of the Evergreen network of podcasts. And I do not make this show by myself. All of the original music that you hear comes from Cormac O'Regan, and he makes that music in his studio here in Cork, Ireland. And I am Cherie Louise Turner. I am your host and producer, and I am coming to you from my home studio closet, also in Cork, Ireland. And until next week, I wish you very joyful, very healthy strides forward.
Women's running. Women's running stories.
My name is Cindy Burnett, and each week I interview at least 2 traditionally published authors on my podcast, Thoughts from a Page. We talk spoiler-free about their books, so you can listen whether you have read the book or not. And then we delve into things that you most likely won't hear about anywhere else. The importance of the cover design, why they included various aspects of the story, personal details about both the books and the authors' lives, and so much more. You can find the podcast on every major platform and learn more about it on my website, thoughtsfromapage.com. Thanks so much for checking it out.